London, late autumn 1989. The rain had already fallen, leaving the streets around Logan Place slick and gleaming under the yellow glow of street lamps. Inside Garden Lodge, Freddie Mercury's guarded, ivy-covered sanctuary, the world's most electric frontman was alone in the quiet of his sitting room, staring at a glass of untouched wine. Downstairs the house was still. No parties. No music. No laughter. Just silence. For years, Freddie Mercury had lived louder than life itself. The sequined costumes, the stadiums full of people, the outrageous interviews, the lovers, the champagne, the endless roar of Freddie. Freddie. But tonight there was no audience to perform for. No spotlight to hide under. Just Freddie, a ticking clock, and a truth he could no longer outrun. On the table beside him lay a letter from his doctor. He didn't need to read it. He already knew what it said. He had known for months. His body was changing. His strength was fading. He was carrying a secret disease that, in 1989, was still a death sentence and a stigma. That night, for the first time, the man the world saw as untouchable let himself say the words out loud, alone in his own house. I can't keep living like this. What happened next, the conversations he had, the decisions he made, and the way he chose to face death on his own terms, would define the final chapter of Freddie Mercury's life. Not the costumes, not the records, not the myths, but the man who had to decide who to tell, who to protect, and how to keep creating while the clock was running out. What did Freddie admit to himself in that room? Who did he finally let into his secret? And how did a man who had given everything to the stage decide how to say goodbye without ever saying it publicly? Keep watching, because this night of brutal honesty, fear, love, and quiet courage shows us who Freddie Mercury really was when the lights went down and the world stopped cheering. It was just after midnight when the house finally settled into complete silence. Earlier that evening, Mary Austin had been there, checking on him, fussing over little things the way she always did. Fresh flowers in a vase. A blanket folded over the arm of a chair. A gentle hand on his shoulder that lingered a second longer than usual, as if she knew there was something in him that was slipping further away. Call me if you need anything, she had said at the door, her eyes searching his face. I always do, darling, Freddie had answered with that familiar half-smile, part charm, part mask. He watched her leave, heard the click of the front door, and then the house became too big, too quiet, too full of his own thoughts. Now he sat alone, a single lamp illuminating the sitting room, shadows stretching across the walls. On the coffee table in front of him lay the letter. White envelope. Black ink. His name written in neat, unassuming handwriting. He had received it 2 days earlier. He hadn't opened it in front of anyone. He waited. He joked. He rehearsed. He pretended. But when he was finally alone, he slid it open with a shaking hand. Positive. Progressive. Opportunistic infections. Immune system severely compromised. The words had blurred as he read them, his vision swimming, the clinical language barely able to contain the reality beneath it. He knew what it meant. He had seen what this disease did. He had watched friends in the gay community in London and New York disappear one by one, reduced to rumors and whispers. He knew the look in the eyes of people who heard the diagnosis. Fear. Pity. Moral judgment disguised as concern. He had always thought, not me. Not Freddie. I'm too fast, too bright, too alive. But the disease didn't care who he was. Now the letter sat on the table, its presence heavy and undeniable. He could feel it in the room like a fourth person. Him, the silence, the fear, and the letter. He leaned back on the sofa, pressing the heels of his hands into his eyes until color burst behind his eyelids. I can't keep living like this, he whispered to no one. It wasn't the first time the thought had crossed his mind, but it was the first time he allowed himself to say it. The last few months had been a relentless cycle of symptoms he refused to admit, lies he told to everyone around him, and a performance he could no longer maintain off stage. There were the bruises that appeared too easily. The weight loss. The fatigue that clung to him like a second skin. The nights when he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how much time he had left and how this would all end. Still, during the day he made jokes. He called people darling and laughed too loudly. He brushed off questions about his health with a wave of his hand. He told reporters he was fine. He told the band he was tired but strong. He told himself it would all somehow miraculously be okay. But the human body doesn't care about charisma. Disease doesn't care about stage presence. He reached for the wine glass, then paused, his hand hovering. Wine suddenly felt trivial, like something that belonged to another life. The life of the man who had strutted across the Live Aid stage 4 years earlier, commanding the world like it was his personal playground. For a moment, he let his mind drift back to that day, The roar of the crowd, the wave of energy, the way his voice had filled the air and bounced off the walls of Wembley Stadium. He had felt invincible. Now, in this quiet room with the ticking of the clock the only applause, he felt anything but. "Enough," he said aloud, startling himself with the firmness in his voice. "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending." The question hung in the air. If he couldn't keep pretending, then what? Who could he tell? Who could he trust with this? His band? His manager? The press would devour him. The world would turn his illness into a spectacle. The tabloids would rip him apart. He thought of Mary. He thought of the band, Brian, Roger, John. He thought of his parents, still in Feltham, still carrying their quiet faith and old-world expectations. He thought of Jim Hutton, waiting upstairs, sensing something was wrong long before Freddie ever spoke the words. The weight of all those faces pressed down on him until he could hardly breathe. At some point he realized he had started to shake. His hands, his chest, his breath, all trembling. He reached for the letter again, gripping it so hard the paper crumpled. "I can't keep living like this," he repeated. "Something has to change." And that was the moment he decided. He could no longer carry this alone. Someone had to know. Someone had to see him. Not Freddie Mercury the star, but Farrokh Bulsara, the man who was terrified of dying before he had finished saying everything he needed to say. Freddie dragged himself upstairs like every step was a negotiation with his own body. The corridors of Garden Lodge were familiar, lined with art, photographs, and pieces of his extravagant taste. In another time, this house had been alive at all hours. Music blaring, friends laughing, champagne glasses clinking against marble countertops. Now it felt like a museum of a life that was slowly fading. He stepped into the bathroom and flicked on the light. The brightness was harsh after the soft glow of the sitting room lamp. For a moment he squinted, letting his eyes adjust, and then he did something he rarely allowed himself to do for long. He looked at himself. Really looked. The man in the mirror looked older than 43. His cheekbones were sharper, his eyes a little hollower, his skin paler than it used to be. The mustache was gone now, a choice he had made quietly without explanation, as though shaving it off could somehow shave off the questions as well. He leaned closer, resting his palms on the sink. "There you are," he murmured to his reflection. "The great Freddie Mercury. Look at you, darling. Not quite the god they all think you are." He tried to smile, but it came out crooked, tired. He thought about all the personas he had worn over the years. The camp rock god, the theatrical showman, the leather-clad provocateur, the delicate balladeer. On stage he could be anything. Off stage he felt increasingly like nothing. The diagnosis had done something to him that no critic, no scandal, no heartbreak had ever managed to do. It had made him feel small. As a child in Zanzibar, then later in England, he had felt like an outsider, too foreign, too quiet, too unusual. Music had become his way out, his way of becoming larger than life. With Queen he had rewritten who he was. He wasn't just Farrokh anymore. He was Freddie Mercury. Immortal. Untouchable. But disease doesn't care what name you go by. His eyes drifted down to the small marks on his arms, to the slight swelling in his lymph nodes, to the weight he had lost so rapidly. The evidence was there, written across his body like a cruel script. He turned the tap on and splashed cold water on his face, trying to shock himself back into control. His heart hammered in his chest. "You can't keep hiding this," he told his reflection. "They'll see it soon anyway. Better they hear it from you." But even as the words left his mouth, fear surged through him. If he told them, everything would change. It wouldn't just be about the music anymore. It would be about pity, speculation, invasive questions. They would look at him differently, not as Freddie the force of nature, but as Freddie the sick man. He thought of Brian's thoughtful, worried eyes. Roger's impulsive anger hiding his tenderness. John's quiet discomfort with conflict. He imagined walking into a room with all three of them and saying it. "I'm ill. I'm really ill." Would they stay? Would they crumble? Would they pull away for protection, theirs or his? And Mary, he closed his eyes at the thought of Mary. She had known him before the world did. She had known him when he was still figuring out who he was before the fame and the madness. She had been the gravitational center of his life. Even when their romance became friendship, even when their lives took different paths. Did she suspect? Did she already know? He opened his eyes again and forced himself to hold his own gaze. "What are you so afraid of?" he asked the man in the mirror quietly. "Dying? Or being seen as vulnerable?" He knew the answer. He was terrified of both. The knock on the bathroom door was soft but firm. "Freddie?" It was Jim Hutton's voice, gentle with its Irish lilt. "You all right in there?" Freddie took a breath, wiped his face with a towel, and straightened his shoulders. The transformation, from man to persona, happened almost by muscle memory. "Fine, darling. Just admiring the view," he called back with a trace of his old flair. He opened the door. Jim stood there, concern in his eyes. He wasn't fooled by the act. Not anymore. "You've been quiet tonight," Jim said. "Too quiet." Freddie walked past him toward the bedroom, the air between them thick with unspoken truths. "Just thinking," he said. "Dangerous habit, I know." Jim followed him. "About what?" Freddie sat on the edge of the bed and looked up at him. For a moment he considered telling him everything right there. The words pressed against the back of his teeth. But habit is a powerful prison. So instead he said, "About tomorrow. About the music. About what's next." Jim sat beside him, close but not touching. "And what is next?" Freddie stared at his hands. "I don't know. That's the problem, isn't it? I don't know how much time I have left. And I don't know how to tell the people who think I'm invincible that I'm not." Jim was quiet for a long moment. Then softly he said, "You don't have to decide everything tonight, love. Just don't carry it on your own." Freddie swallowed hard, feeling his throat tighten. "I can't keep living like this," he said again, more to himself than anyone else. And this time he knew he was no longer talking about the disease alone. He was talking about the lie, the silence, the constant performance of being okay. Something had to break, either his body or his fear. Mary Austin, the keeper of his truth. By the next afternoon, Freddie had barely slept. He drifted in and out of restless dreams, flashes of stadium lights, hospital beds, whispered rumors, headlines he hadn't even read but could already imagine. When he finally opened his eyes, sunlight was spilling through the curtains in thick golden stripes. For a moment he pretended it was just another morning, that he was simply tired from a late night, that he had no letter, no diagnosis, no fear rotting at the edges of his calm. But the envelope on the bedside table destroyed that illusion immediately. He sat up slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. His body ached in ways it never had before, not the usual exhaustion of performance, not the soreness from rehearsals, but something deeper, something cellular. Something that felt like erosion. He reached for the letter again. Then stopped. What good would rereading it do? The words wouldn't change. His truth wouldn't change. But something else needed to. There was one person, only one, who could hear this truth without letting it break him. "Mary. Monsieur." Oh. He picked up the phone with trembling fingers and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. "Freddie?" Her voice was soft, warm, familiar. A voice that had known him before the world did. He closed his eyes. Just hearing her steadied him. "Can you come over, darling?" Freddie asked. He tried for his usual flamboyant tone, but it came out thin, unconvincing. Mary didn't ask why. She never did. "I'm on my way," she said. "Barry." Well. 30 minutes later, Freddie heard her unlocking the front door with her key, the same key he had given her years ago when he told her, "Whatever happens, you will always have a home here." She stepped into the foyer, her coat still dripping from the rain. When she saw him standing at the top of the staircase, her expression softened in a way only Mary could manage. Concern without panic, love without pity. "Oh, Freddie." Just 2 words, but he felt them like an embrace. He walked down the stairs slowly, each step a confession. When he reached her, Mary cupped his face gently. "You look tired," she said. "I am," Freddie replied. More than usual, she added quietly. He didn't deny it. Let's sit, he said. There's something I need to tell you. The Confies. Shout. They sat on the sofa in the living room. Freddie's hands were clasped so tightly his knuckles went white. Mary waited, patient, steady, giving him the space to gather the shards of courage he needed. Finally he exhaled. Mary? I'm ill. Her eyes filled instantly, but she didn't interrupt. It's serious, Freddie continued. Very serious. She swallowed hard. How long have you known? A while, he admitted. I kept pushing it aside. Pretending. Hoping. Freddie, her voice broke. Why didn't you tell me? He looked down at his hands. Because telling you makes it real. Mary reached out and held his trembling fingers. It's real whether you tell me or not. But you shouldn't carry this alone. Freddie's voice cracked when he whispered, I'm scared, Mary. She nodded, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. I know. He looked up at her, eyes bright with terror he had hidden from everyone else. Promise me something, he said. Anything. When this gets worse, his voice trailed off. He had to swallow before he could continue. Don't let them turn me into a tragedy. Mary shook her head fiercely. No one could ever reduce you to that. Not while I'm here. But they will try. The press. The public. Even the ones who claim to love me. I don't want my life, my name, swallowed by this disease. Your life is bigger than any illness, she said. Your legacy too. And I will protect both. I swear it. Freddie closed his eyes and for a moment, the fear in his face softened. You're the only person I trust with this, he whispered. Mary leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. Then I'll help you carry it. The moment that broke him. It was only after they sat in silence for several minutes that Freddie finally allowed himself to sob. Deep, shaking, terrified sobs that came from a place he'd buried for years. Mary held him like she had when he was young, unknown, insecure, before he invented Freddie Mercury to shield Farrokh Bulsara from the world. And in her arms he finally allowed himself to be Farrokh again. Just a man. A scared man. A man trying to figure out how to keep living when the future felt like it had already been written. When Freddie finally lifted his head, eyes swollen, voice hoarse, he said, I don't want to die. And Mary answered the only way she could. Then we face this together. The day Freddie closed the studio door and told them everything. For days after his confession to Mary, Freddie walked around Garden Lodge like a man carrying a glass heart, terrified that any sudden movement might shatter what little control he had left. Jim watched him quietly. Mary checked in constantly. But Freddie knew what came next, the part he'd been dreading more than anything. He had to tell the band. Queen wasn't just a group. They were four men bound together in a way that had survived fame, fights, egos, marriages, breakups, and reinventions. They were brothers, complicated, messy, irreplaceable. And he was about to break their hearts. The call to the band. It was Roger he called first, the one who noticed every shift in Freddie's behavior long before anyone else did. Roger, darling, Freddie said, trying to keep his voice light. I need you, Brian, and John to come to the studio tomorrow. What's going on? Roger asked immediately. You sound different. Freddie hesitated, then forced a smile into his voice. It's just time we talk about a few things. Bring your heart, dear. You'll need it. When he hung up, Freddie stared at the phone for a long time as though expecting it to ring again. It didn't. He spent the rest of the evening rehearsing what he would say. But every version ended with the same silence. The silence of three men who didn't know how to lose him. The meeting in the St. Udio. The next afternoon, the studio felt colder than usual. The walls were covered with soundproof padding, but the room carried a stillness that made Freddie's skin crawl. Brian arrived first. His eyes searched Freddie's face immediately. Are you all right? He asked softly. As all right as one can be in this cruel world, Freddie answered with a forced smirk. Roger entered next, restless, arms crossed, pacing. John last, quiet, observant, shoulders tense. They all sensed it. Something was wrong. The noun. Cement. Freddie stood in front of them, hands shaking slightly at his sides. He looked at the three men who knew him better than almost anyone in the world, who had watched him transform from the shy art student into the roaring god of stadiums. He exhaled long and slow. There's something I need to tell you, Freddie began. Three sets of eyes locked on him. I'm ill. Very ill. Brian frowned. Roger stopped pacing. John's face collapsed before anyone else reacted. Freddie continued before they could ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. I have AIDS. The words echoed through the studio in a way that made the walls feel closer. Brian stepped back a little, shock flooding his features. Roger turned away, hands on his head, letting out a sharp breath. John sat down because his knees simply gave out. Freddie watched them, and for the first time since the diagnosis he felt truly naked in front of other people. "I didn't want you to find out from tabloids," he said quietly. "I didn't want pity. I didn't want drama. And I certainly didn't want you to see me falling apart." Brian's voice finally broke the silence. "Freddie, why didn't you tell us sooner?" Freddie swallowed, his throat tightening. "Because you're my family. And I wanted to protect you from this. From watching me fade." Roger slammed his fist lightly against the wall, not in anger at Freddie but in anger at the universe. "This is bullshit," Roger said, voice cracking. "You don't deserve this. You don't." Freddie held up a hand gently. "Darling, life doesn't care what we deserve." Brian stepped closer, tears forming despite his effort to stay composed. "Freddie, whatever you need, whatever you want, we're here. We're not going anywhere." John finally managed to speak through trembling lips. "We love you, Fred." That was the moment Freddie broke. He had prepared himself for their shock, their sadness, even their fear, but not for their love. He covered his face with both hands, shoulders shaking. Brian put a hand on his back. Roger leaned against him. John touched his arm, grounding him. Freddie, who had performed to millions, who had commanded stadiums with a single gesture, who had built an entire life around being larger than life, now stood small and fragile between the three men who had built that life with him. The decision they made. When Freddie finally composed himself, he looked at them with a new determination. "I don't want the world to know," he said. "Not yet. Not until I'm ready." "We won't say a word," Brian promised. "And," Freddie continued, "I want to keep working. Music is the only thing keeping me standing." Roger wiped his face. "Then we make music. Whatever you want. However long you can." John nodded. "We'll do it quietly. Privately. Like family." Freddie exhaled, relief mixed with fear, mixed with gratitude so overwhelming he didn't know what to do with it. He looked at the three of them and whispered, "Then let's make something beautiful, while we still can." And they did. From that day, Queen moved as one heart, not four musicians, but four souls racing against a clock none of them could see. Freddie's final battle, and the music that held him together. After telling the band the truth, something changed inside Freddie. Not a sudden acceptance. Not peace. But purpose. The fear was still there, humming beneath the surface like an electrical current, yet now it shared space with something steadier. Something almost defiant. Music. If he couldn't control his body, he would control his voice. If he couldn't save his future, he would save the songs. The routine of a dying man. Every morning Jim would help Freddie down the stairs. Freddie hated being seen as weak, but he trusted Jim enough to accept the arm quietly. Some days, Freddie had enough strength to walk on his own. Other days, the fatigue hit like a wave before he even left bed. The disease was unpredictable, cruel in its timing, relentless in its progression. But there was one thing it couldn't touch. The studio. The studio as a lifeline. Brian, Roger, and John adjusted everything around Freddie without making it obvious. The lights were kept dim because Freddie's eyes had become sensitive. The room was warm to ease his chills. Breaks were frequent, disguised as casual pauses. Chairs were placed nearby, though Freddie rarely used them, pride refusing to let him sit. But when the music started, something miraculous happened. Freddie transformed. Weakness melted off him. His back straightened. His voice, though softer now, more fragile, still carried the same soul, the same fire, the same ache that made millions feel something indescribable. Brian later said. He was disappearing before our eyes. But the moment he stood in front of the microphone, he was Freddie Mercury again. The songs that revealed his heart. The band didn't question him. They didn't ask how much time he had. They didn't talk about the illness. They talked about songs, chords, lyrics, harmony, the work, the thing that had always glued them together. But the songs themselves told the truth. These are the days of our lives. Too much love will kill you. Mother love. A winter's tale. Every lyric was a confession he couldn't bring himself to speak directly. There was a moment Brian never forgot. Freddie recording Mother Love. He stood at the microphone, eyes closed, voice trembling as he sang. I don't want to sleep with you. I don't need the passion to. I just want to be with you. And make it all right. Halfway through the song he stopped. His breath stuttered. His face went pale. Let's take a break, dear, he whispered. Brian thought he meant minutes, maybe a couple of hours. Freddie never returned to finish the song. Those were the last vocals he ever recorded. The pie. And he hid from the world. As the illness progressed, simple things became battles. Climbing stairs. Holding a glass without shaking. Walking without tripping. Seeing without blurring. He never told the band just how much it hurt. Never admitted how scared he was of the next day, the next symptom, the next humiliation. But they saw it anyway. They saw the lesions under the makeup. They saw his swollen feet. They saw the way he winced when sitting or standing. And still, every time, Freddie said the same thing. I want to work. Let's keep going. Don't stop for me. Brian once suggested taking a month off. Freddie shook his head. I don't have a month. Those words hit like a punch to the chest, but no one dared argue. He knew his time better than they did. The beauty in his final days of art. There was a strange peace in those sessions. A quiet unity. No fights. No egos. No disagreements about tempo or lyrics or who wrote what. All of that seemed irrelevant now. They weren't just recording songs. They were preserving the last pieces of their friend. Freddie would often stand by the window between takes, watching the sunlight spill across the garden. He once whispered to Brian, "When I'm gone, promise me the music won't stop. Finish everything. Polish it. Make it beautiful. Let the world hear me one last time." Brian swallowed hard and nodded. He didn't trust his voice to speak. He knew it was his last recording. It was late, nearly midnight, when Freddie walked into the studio one final time. He wore sunglasses even indoors, hiding how red and fragile his eyes had become. He placed his hand on the microphone stand as he'd done thousands of times before and said quietly, "Roll the tape." Those words were routine. But tonight they sounded like goodbye. He recorded for 20 minutes. Then 10 more. Then 5. Finally he stepped back breathless. "I think," he said softly, "I think that's all I have left." He touched the microphone with his fingertips, a gesture almost like prayer, then turned to the band. "Finish it well, boys." He smiled. A real smile. A peaceful one. And then he walked out of the studio. They all knew. Every one of them. He wouldn't be back. When the spotlight fades. After his final recording session, Freddie felt something shift inside him. Not a sudden collapse, but a quiet surrender. His life had been measured for decades in soundchecks, rehearsals, tour dates, album deadlines. Always something next. Always something to prepare for. Always one more performance. But now, there was nothing left to prepare for. He had given the last of his voice to the music. The rest of his strength he saved for the people he loved. The house that became a whirl. Garden Lodge transformed in the final months. Mary visited daily. Jim never left his side. Joe Finelli and Peter Freestone helped with meals, medicine, and the small routines Freddie could no longer manage on his own. Friends came quietly, no parties, no champagne, no flash, just soft conversations, gentle touches, and memories shared like fragile treasures. Freddie didn't want pity, so he hid the worst of his pain. Only those closest to him saw the truth. His eyesight fading. His legs weakening. His voice reduced to whispers. Lesions growing harder to conceal. Fatigue settling deep into his bones. But even in decline he insisted on dignity. "I don't want the neighbors talking," he once joked to Peter, adjusting his silk robe. "Let them assume I still strut around in leather." He kept his humor until the end, a shield, a weapon, a reminder of who he had been. The conversation Mary. One evening, Mary found him sitting in the garden room, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the koi pond outside. She sat beside him quietly. No words at first. Just presence. After a long silence, Freddie spoke, voice soft, brittle. "Mary, do you think I lived well?" She turned to him, startled by the rawness of the question. "Freddie, you lived more in one lifetime than most people could in 10. You gave the world so much joy." He shook his head slightly. "I don't mean the world, darling. I mean personally. As a human being. Did I do right by the people I loved?" Mary reached for his hand. "You loved deeply. Fiercely. Honestly. Even when it hurt. Even when you were scared. That's all any of us can do." Freddie closed his eyes, letting her words sink in. A single tear slipped down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. "Promise me something," he whispered. Mary nodded without hesitation. "Anything. When I'm gone, don't let them turn my death into a circus. Please. I don't want the world peering into my illness. I want them to remember the music. The shows. The laughter." Mary squeezed his hand. I'll protect you. Even after. And she did. The decision he to make. By November 1991, Freddie knew time was short. His doctors knew. His friends knew. He knew. But there was one thing he had been refusing for months. Letting the world know. He didn't want headlines. Didn't want speculation. Didn't want paparazzi vultures gathering outside Garden Lodge like they had outside others dying of the same disease. But Queen had a problem. Rumors were escalating. The tabloids were closing in. Freddie needed to take control of the narrative, one last time. On November 22, 1991, he finally agreed to release a statement through his publicist. He wrote it from bed, voice too weak to speak it aloud, but his mind sharp and clear. Began. Following the enormous conjecture in the press, I wish to confirm that I have been tested HIV positive. And have AIDS. He ended it with, I hope that everyone will join with me, my doctors, and all those worldwide in the fight against this terrible disease. It was the only public acknowledgement he ever made. Less than 24 hours later, Freddie Mercury slipped into a coma. The goodbye he never said. On the night of November 24, 1991, with Mary, Jim, Peter, and Joe in the house, Freddie took his final breaths. He didn't speak. He didn't open his eyes. He didn't perform. He simply let go. Quietly. Softly. On his own terms. Like the final note of a song that lingers in the air long after the music stops. The world reacts. News broke the next morning. Fans gathered outside Garden Lodge by the hundreds, then thousands. Flowers piled against the walls. Candles flickered through the night. People wept openly in the street, strangers united by a voice that had changed their lives. The world mourned a legend. But those who loved him mourned a man. A complicated, brilliant, frightened, generous, stubborn, dazzling man. Freddie Mercury. A legacy that refuses to die. Before he passed, Freddie whispered to Brian during one of their last visits. Don't let my music die with me. Brian promised, and he kept that promise. Queen's final recordings were completed. Tributes were held around the world. New generations discovered him. His voice, immortal, continues to echo across decades. Freddie Mercury didn't just leave behind music. He left behind courage, love, vulnerability, fire, and the reminder that even gods of the stage are human when the lights go out. But perhaps the most powerful truth Freddie ever gave the world was this. Even in his final moments, he refused to stop being himself. Fierce, dramatic, tender, unforgettable. A star that never truly fades.